Welcome to the Working Without Waste podcast, powered by ERC Midwest, the podcast that's all about sharing ideas and stories that increase your productivity and decrease waste in your business and personal life. I'm your host, Mike Malatesta, one of the leaders here at ERC Midwest. My guest today is Josh Shefner. Josh is the founder and CEO of Agricycle Global, a Milwaukee-based social enterprise company committed to eliminating food waste while creating high-paying jobs for women farmers in Sub Saharan Africa, in Latin America, and in the Caribbean. I got to meet Josh and his co-founder Claire Friona while they were raising funds for Agricycle, I guess raising their first seed funds. And I happened to be part of an organization called Bright Star Wisconsin Foundation that ended up investing into Josh's company. And I was on the investment committee looking at Josh's company and had the chance to spend some time with him. And it was he's got a really amazing story that he's going to share with you today on a lot of levels. First of all, the work that the company is doing is remarkable. And second, just how he and Claire and the rest of his team as students at MSOE, Milwaukee School of Engineering, came up with this idea and essentially started the business while they were still in school. In fact, I think Claire actually suspended her education to get this thing off the ground. So you're about to be impressed, and you're about to learn some things that you probably have no idea about, and how Agricycle is really on a mission to change the world. So Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for that introduction, Mike.
Yeah, so I guess first off, can you just share with us where the idea for Agricycle came from, Josh?
Yeah. So Agricycle did not start out, where it is now. I was a part of a school project that was tasked by a nonprofit in Jamaica with turning dried mangoes into beer. The point of it was that the rural farming village in Jamaica had an abundance of mangoes that they had no other use for. The local market was oversaturated, local supply chains were inefficient, so it couldn't be brought anywhere else, and they didn't have any technology locally available to preserve it. So there was a different group that was making a dehydrator, and that would allow the farmers to preserve the dried mangoes. But the question then became what to do with the dried mangoes. So this school project basically was creating a business model for a very Milwaukee solution, but turning dried mangoes into beer so that farmers could make money. Very quickly, we told them this is silly, that it's not going to work. Dried mango beer just sounds terrible. And also just the fact that you would have to dehydrate it, ship it, rehydrate it, and then distill it. It's not a mango by the point that it's becoming a beer. So that was the main issue, but we pivoted the whole thing to, why do any processing past dried mangoes? Dried mangoes have a large market already. They're relatively universally loved, and it's a simple production process. So you could try building a market for dried mangoes. It was in the process of that first year in college that all the other partners dropped out of it. So the senior design team that was supposed to make the dehydrator and design it, the consultants who were figuring out the logistics, everyone left this project, and it left a bunch of first year college students to do the rest of it. So we designed the dehydrator. We figured out part of the food safety that was needed. We figured out part of the logistics. We went to Jamaica and we built this unit for them. And they were like, great, thank you, this is very cool. Who cares? What use is a dehydrator to me? And what use are dried mangoes to me if, I don't have anybody to sell it to? Nobody will buy it here locally. I don't know how to get it to America. Once it's in America, I can't do anything with it. So essentially, the farmer spelled out the need for a vertically integrated business, from technology to training to logistics to branding, marketing, and sales, for transforming local food waste into economic opportunity.
Okay, so basically, you had what essentially was an academic exercise that you brought to these folks in Jamaica, and they said, "Okay, college kids, this is really cool, but what am I going to do with it?" And
Yeah,
then,
kind of a classic with college engineering students doing something that isn't actually useful outside of college. But uh, we we took it much farther than where the school wanted it to stop. So the school wanted it to stop at Jamaica. We said, sure, school project done. We see a bigger model that was explored with this program, and so that's what we took outside of it. That's when we started going to some of the local accelerators in Milwaukee, National Science Foundation, Innovation Corps. That's when we went to the Commons, and we started to really flesh out this larger idea of what Blue Mangoes was. Blue Mangoes was the dehydrators and dried fruit. How we got to Agricycle was that dried fruit, a, was not enough to entice any amount of donations or investors or anybody to help actually fund the project, but it also didn't go far enough for the farmers. If all you could do is just take the meat of a mango and dehydrate it, that's nice and all, but in a lot of ways it still wasn't moving the needle enough for them. So we started looking at what could we do with the byproducts of the dried fruit. One of those was to be sorry about that. One of those was to be turning the pits of mangoes into a gluten-free baking flour. Another one was to turn the shells of coconuts into a charcoal, and they would all funnel through the same supply chain. So it's the same trucks, it's the same farms, it's the same processing facilities for the most part, and it's the same containers that get moved over to the US. So, that's when we grew up into Agricycle, this much larger vision of closing the gap between rural farmers in developing economies to global markets.
and when you were first doing the project in Jamaica, and you were taking direction and kind of fleshing out how it could be a business, what was it that really got you excited about it, Josh? I guess for Claire to leave and you guys to just jump all in on this thing, what got you excited about the opportunity?
Yeah, I think that so I went to university seeking to study. Well, I was studying engineering, but the point of it was for humanitarian engineering. So I wanted a practical skill set that would bring me into the world of international development, where instead of studying international relations, and writing public policies, and maybe one or two would get taken up, but within 4 years, the next administration would take it down. I wanted to do something that would last. So I wanted to work on civil infrastructure. I did that with Engineers Without Borders in Guatemala. That was actually a large reason for why I chose the university I went to, because they had such an amazing program with EWB. And so with all those things said, uh, there's still a gap between building infrastructure, in some areas that is absolutely necessary for other people to come in and help with the engineering and financing. But there's a gap between that and what will actually move the needle as far as extreme poverty is concerned. So local solutions that are market based is the only proven way to eradicate extreme rural poverty. There's no amount of, Switzerland based, minimum, basic income. There's no amount of donations for a new, greenhouse to allow people to farm more that actually changes things fundamentally for farmers. People need jobs, and they need jobs that are consistent, that they can rely on. And normally that's not designed by some giant, nonprofit that, circles the globe and says, hey, I have an idea for how we do agriculture now. And it involves giant greenhouse dehydrators. So, some of the groups we work with, like the World Food Program, they would build very large greenhouse style dehydrators. And they had a method called, it was community based development. And so the idea was that they get buy-in. And this was a big, movement in international development, that you get buy-in from the group you're trying to help, that you actually get them to agree to the solution that you're offering them. Well, typically what that means in practice is that you just go to the people who speak English in the village, in Sub-Saharan Africa. And a lot of times that just happens to be some of the richer, older men who had better educations. And so you have them speaking on behalf of the whole community. And since they're seen as community leaders, mostly just on the basis that they speak a language that can easily be responded to, you have money being poured in to dehydrators built on their land. Well, then they turn around and charge everyone else to use those dehydrators. So to really answer your question, what excited me the most about our model is that it was truly from the bottom of the economic pyramid, from the individual smallholder farmer, the individual woman working on a plantation could get a dehydrator, an individual dehydrator that was appropriately designed for her, didn't need electricity, could be brought inside and washed every day. There was no requirement to own land because it was small enough, and could allow her to make more money that day, and 7 to 10 times as much as she otherwise would. So that's what excited us, that it seems, and what we're trying to prove is that it is an effective model that proves that the big ones don't work.
Okay. And so essentially, as I'm listening to you, the dehydrator is the key, because the dehydrator creates freedom, is the way I'm interpreting what you said there. So rather than, a large landowner, for example, owning or being given a large dehydrator to benefit the whole community, you're basically saying, hey, you can take your own dehydrator, you can create your own business essentially, and here's how you do it. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Imagine if you live in, actually just imagine like 6 square blocks. Could you convince all the people in those 6 square blocks to use the same garden, and and for that to be your primary source of income? You can convince all those people to work the same shifts, and all the conflict that pops up. Basically, our model rewards the people who do the work, and empowers them to have access to the technology. We support women who have no credit history with getting microfinance loans to afford it. We then, provide the social credit for them to get it. We work individually with the banks to say, hey, yes, we will purchase $500 worth of fruit from her for this $350 loan. So they're guaranteed to get their money back, because they know she will make enough to pay it back within the first month or two. And then after that, we just do purchase orders. So there's a lot we do to making sure that nobody's tied to a system that could hold them back.
And the dehydrator itself, that seems like the key. What is, how did you design it? What makes it different than, you mentioned a couple things like, no power and stuff like that, but how did you actually design it, have it made, and then get it tested in Africa, for example?
Yeah. So I designed for about 4 years passive solar dehydrators. They're simple machines that work without any electricity, kind of like a chimney. You're trying to create hot air just by using the heat of the sun and capturing it in a certain space, and then forcing the direction that it moves in. You want to force the direction that hot air moves in, so that it goes through slices of fresh fruit. Hot air moving through slices of fresh fruit dries it out, and also moving past it, etc. So that's the idea behind a passive solar dehydrator. I did not invent that. That's been around for, different versions have existed for millennia. The modern ones you'll find in the backyards of, those outdoorsy folks. That's been popular for the last 50 years. What's unique to what we did, and this is where Claire really gets all the credit for the design, is that our dehydrators are engineered not for, an enthusiast in America who has access to power tools, specific types of lumber, being able to buy structural lumber just to begin with, all the solar anodized plates that you'd want to optimize its drying efficiency. We instead designed the dehydrator, Claire did, in order to focus on food safety in a rural setting. So it's not about how many kilograms can you produce per day. It's about how many kilograms that meet food safety standards can you produce per day. So her dehydrator has no element that is exposed to the outside, that isn't completely protected from dirt, winds, bugs, etc. And it allows us to hit food safety standards and regulations that get it exported, approved, lab tested, etc., and brought to the US. Because the whole system is that the dehydrator is only a tool for them to create a product that can be purchased in a higher paying market. So that's the primary focus of it. Claire did that by making this easily shipped design. Each dehydrator fits in a quarter of a shipping pallet. So it was sized so that we could ship a lot of them. The trays themselves nest within each other to take up very little room, and they're easily disassembled every day, which means that they're taken out of the elements, they're brought inside, and they're cleaned. One of the first dehydrators to ever do that, surprisingly, because most dehydrators just sit out in the open and are exposed all day. So it was that focus in Claire's design that really lets farmers, that really makes our model work.
And tell me about the beta testing, Josh. So how did you get these? You design the dehydrator, you get it over there, people have to start using it. How do you recruit and introduce people to the idea, and how do you beta test it?
That was really fun. I'd say the second and third year, part of the fourth, for 2.5 years that I worked on this, it was different trips across the world. So I flew to Panama, I flew to Guatemala, to Jamaica, to Uganda, to Kenya. Claire did as well to many of them. And our job was to, with communities we had already spoken to and identified. And we learned to go through communities specifically, not through a nonprofit to a community, but to the community directly. To rely on nonprofits proved fatal in a lot of cases. So what we did is we went directly to these communities who, expressed their interest in, yes, we understand, what the model is. We understand you'll pay us for dried fruit we create, not just like paying us to work at a job basically, and you buy the fresh fruit and we'll dry it for you. But that, there's still a contract farmer. They would agree to the idea of, yes, this is a great rate for us. This is, 5 times more than I could otherwise get. And then they also had to be believing that this technology could work. That was the key. So we'd show up and we'd teach the local communities how to build their own dehydrators. For a while, they were built out of local materials. So we'd, present the principle of passive solar convection, which is hot air rises, and how to, force that in a direction. We'd show them within the first day how to dry fruit. Everyone's very excited. More people will show up the second day. And this time representatives from neighboring communities will show up as well. Then we start teaching them, we teach a local few masons and carpenters with us so that when we leave, they can be the ones paid to keep building more of them. But we then teach basically the steps of how to do it. We then provide everyone a manual at the end of it. And now they're, in a cooperative of ours. And that's how it started. In late 2018 was the first time we went to Sub Saharan Africa. Within a year, we had 11,000 farmers in our network. And that was almost entirely word of mouth. Now, the key here is that it wasn't me traveling back every time. we very quickly hired field officers, some of our managers. Patrick is our director of East Africa, and he manages a large team of food safety managers, logistics experts, field officers, and he helped to coordinate, the expansion of our community network. We're now at 40,000 farmers, a year after that. So there's been massive growth on that side, and it really is because of word of mouth, because we took an approach, we're taught at the beginning to speak to a community in a way that they'll understand is what we were told, or that we had to adjust our presentation so that they will understand it, because it's otherwise too complicated, and that you have to teach them the merits of preserving food locally first, and then layer on that it could make money and all these things. They're all a little patronizing. They're all taught by nonprofits to us. They're all a little patronizing in terms of, can you talk to another person and just pitch them, hey, this is what we're trying to do. We'll pay this much for this much fruit. Does that sound good to you? So
they can figure it out. In other words, you present them with an opportunity, they can figure it out.
Exactly. Yeah. Just believing that they're smart enough to say yes or no. And we got plenty of no's too. And so, we would show up and I would pitch the same as I pitched an investor. I would pull up a presentation slide deck. I would show them what we're doing. I'll show them the progress we've made in America and what we're trying to do here. Show them the price we'll pay, what they have to do it, how much we'll be able to buy. Are you in or are you out? There were people who would say they're in, people who say they're out. And I think that worked. Every other project we did before was this very curated, we found people that we think would be a good fit for this sort of project, and they never were. So, our approach of just treating people like people was actually our biggest advantage compared to everyone else trying to work with farmers.
And before you came along with this idea, as I understand it, the fruit grows no matter what, but what happens to it is, its economic impact is, if it can't be dehydrated and sold somewhere else, it essentially goes to waste. Is that well, whatever can get eaten locally, I suppose, but otherwise it goes to waste. Is that?
Exactly. Otherwise it goes to waste. So in a lot of cases, you have farmers who are partly optimistic that this is the year that they're suddenly going to sell more fruit. So you do have part on the farmer level of people are growing more food than they should be. But there's so many other reasons. You have the fact that buyers dried up and moved somewhere else, or that somebody started, selling for less because it was imported from India, if it's mangoes. You have situations where in northern Uganda, mango trees are planted for purely cultural reasons for the most part. And so when you're starting a new family, you're planting a mango tree. When you have children, you plant more mango trees, and you're also planting them for shade. They provide wonderful shade. Half of our meetings happened under a mango tree. The main thing here is that every one of those mango trees that gets planted produces 3,000 mangoes a year. It's a ton of mangoes. So the average family, when we did it, so within a 95% confidence interval, the bottom of it was 7 mango trees. That 95% we did this in 3 communities. There was like 500 survey respondents. Everyone had 7 or more mango trees. 95% of people had 7 or more mango trees, which means that they're producing at minimum, 20,000 mangoes per year. So that's the sort of waste, the scale of the waste that we're working with. And the issue is that those seasons are condensed. It's not 20,000 mangoes over 12 months. It's 20,000 mangoes over 2.5 months.
Sure. So now you've raised at least $1.5 million, maybe more at this point. You've qualified for a lot of grants. You've been fortunate on the fundraising side, although it may not feel like that to you because these things are a grind. But what's happened now? So you prove the concept, you do the beta, you do the road show, essentially, you recruit farmers. I should have asked about women farmers because all of the farmers are women, or the vast majority are women.
Vast majority.
Yeah. So what is the reason for that? And then I'll finish the rest of the questions. 'Cause I don't think people might not understand that.
Yeah. Thanks for giving me that opportunity on that. So in Uganda, it's something like 84% of the agricultural labor force is women. Meanwhile, land ownership is something like 9-1, men to women. Uh, it's completely unbalanced as far as who does the work, even on the smallest of smallholder scales. When somebody has 10 trees and the man statutorily owns the land that they live on, but the woman is the one who's growing these trees, who's tending to them, and who's bringing them to the market, the man gets the money because it's his land. We don't play into that system, so we pay the money directly to whoever gives us the dried fruit, basically. And we help women establish their own independent bank accounts. Most women in our cooperatives previously weren't a part of the financial system, whereas a lot of times their husbands were. And so that's a big difference that Agricycle is able to make, because we specifically focus on bringing women into the financial system, providing them with credit, helping them pay off that loan. And then, now they have improved credit. They now have a recoverable asset, the dehydrator, that they can use as collateral for future loans. They have a bank account now that the bank has worked through. We make sure they get financial literacy training. All of that together, just reflects who's doing the work, not just who happens to own the tree, because for most reasons, you can't, women have trouble inheriting land. It's not as though the men bought the land themselves and tended themselves and that we're stealing. It's just we're reflecting the fact that practically she's the one who's actually farming, doing the work, and cares. And this way she's able to get the money and then spend it on her kids, on herself, on education within the family. And there's a ton of studies behind that, of just, the outsized impact of $1 given to a woman compared to $1 given to a man, as far as percentage breakdown of where it gets spent. So with our focus being on impact, it just makes more sense. Yeah,
The
that's where we're focused.
majority of the women then are dehydrating fruit that's grown on their own land, or theirs and their husband's land, or their family's land, right? Is that correct?
A lot,
Based on what
yeah.
you spoke about that.
There's also plenty of women in our cooperatives who their households don't have any fruit trees,
Okay.
but they purchase fruit that would otherwise go to waste from other farmers. And they purchase it at the local standard price. You can buy a mango for between 1 to 2 cents in northern Uganda. So a woman might buy, mangoes for 1 to 2 cents. They'll buy 50 mangoes for $1. Okay. And so they'll take those 50 mangoes and then they'll bring it to the dehydrator that they have. And then they'll process those, and we pay that rate.
Okay.
So sometimes that's also a system where they don't have their own trees. So the farmer still gets, the local rate for what they're selling. And now they just sell more of it. But it's the woman who's, making the money.
Okay. And so thanks for that. And you've raised the money. You're able to do a lot more now, I suppose, than you can. Tell me what's happening with the business now. What are the products? What's unique about them? And where are you going?
Yeah, definitely. So these are two of our products. We have the Jali Fruit which is this dried fruit that I've been talking about. Jali Fruit is a family of fun, ethically sourced, upcycled, sun-dried fruits without any added sugars or preservatives, that are fully traceable from tree to shelf with our Find My Farm QR codes. So these QR code stickers are individually hand labeled on every single bag that we have. And so they're able to, when you scan it, it takes you to a web page that tells you the story of the women who dried them, the farmers who grew them, and where in the world they came from. That's really our differentiating factor on the dried fruit, which you think dried fruit is dried fruit, but we try to show you not just a generalized story of somebody from Honduras and they represent every bag of dried fruit that a company ever makes, but instead we're trying to actually take you to the place where these dried fruits were made.
Personalized. So the women are actually building a brand almost while you're building a brand.
Exactly. And if you look at the website, you can go through many of our cooperatives. We're starting to put up video content, interviews. We're highlighting exactly what they're doing. They're the front of it. And in fact, Jali, the name Jali, a Jali is a storyteller in parts of West Africa, modern day Mali for most of it. And they're a musical storyteller that regale the history of a community through song and dance and stories. And really the point of Jali for us and why we took that name, because it's a happy smiley face when you say it in the US or English. But a Jali is based on sharing stories. And so the Jali Fruit Co. is sharing the story of all the women in our cooperatives and putting them at the front.
Okay.
And then we have tropical. Yeah, so we have tropical ignition. It's a better for everyone charcoal that burns hotter, far longer than Kingsford, and ends charcoal-based deforestation because we're using upcycled food ingredients rather than cutting and burning down trees. For those of you who are familiar with how Kingsford makes their stuff, they don't cut down trees. I don't want anyone to think that. But they are taking wood that could otherwise be repurposed for construction, et cetera, and turning it into something that you just burn. Instead, we're taking things that otherwise would have gone to waste, truly, from the most rural of farms. We're talking about coconut shells, cassava starch, and we're turning it into a better charcoal. So that's what tropical ignition is.
So how do people get a hold of you? How do people find out more about Agricycle? And what's the future look like? Like, for instance, when are people going to be able to buy these products? Or maybe they can already. Can they buy through your website? How do people connect with you?
Definitely. So if you want to learn about the company overall, agricycleglobal.com, AGRI cycle, which is Agricycle or agricultural upcycling was, how we made that name, but that's where you can find some news about us. You can see recent coverage in Fast Company. You can see what we're up to on our impact. We'll tell you all about where we're at, where we're going. As for the sales side, if you want to try our dried fruit, Jali Fruit, JALI fruit.co is where you can order it right now. We do have a holiday special right now. There's a lot of things that you can try out there. Tropical Ignition is launching next year, and we'll be launching in some major Midwest retailers. So there will be opportunities then, but we can't announce that yet.
Okay. Well, Josh, I really do appreciate you coming on the Working Without Waste podcast today and talking to us about Agricycle. As I mentioned at the beginning, the work that you're doing is probably something that most people have never heard about. But once you hear about it, it's hard to not say, wow, like you guys are really, you are essentially changing the world and taking a waste and converting it into something with a lot of value halfway around the world. It's remarkable.
Thank you very much. Yeah. The point of what we're doing, the whole system is taking things that don't have a use and then finding a way to make money from them. In between, we're just making sure it lines up with the impact. All
right. Well, congratulations on the work, and we'll look forward to hearing more as Agricycle matures as a company.
Yeah, thank you very much.